Okay. Good morning and welcome back to day 2 of Power Experts. I hope those of you that were here yesterday thoroughly enjoyed it, and for those of you joining us for today, welcome. This morning is where the roundtables take place. So on the back of your badge should be where you've made your choices, and the order of your tables that you go to is there for you. Each of the roundtables are labelled pretty much 1 round to 8, and each session will be 30 minutes with the host of the roundtable, and then I'll give you a quick call to let you know when to change around. Although it's not printed on the agenda, lunch will be at 1 o'clock in case anyone's sat there thinking, when are we going to get fed? And also at the close of the day, there'll be refreshments for you. So if you do want to stay around for a little bit longer, there will be coffee and things there for you. The next conference will be taking place in Atlanta at the end of October, where we'll also have the addition of a natural gas conference as well. So if you have any questions about that, then please come and see one of us today. And so with that, please extend a warm hand to the chairman of day 2, Doug Scott, Chairman of the Illinois Commerce Commission.
Thank you, Eloise. Good morning. It's really show of hands, how many people are like from the area? And all right. Well, Northern Illinois, Indiana, and around the area here. Well, it's really good to be here with you today, obviously discussing really important topics. For those of you who are not familiar with us, which there's no reason why you should be, the Illinois Commerce Commission is actually the Public Utility Commission here in Illinois. So we're the folks that are regulating the utilities, and obviously all the issues that you're talking about greatly influences power generation in the area, and obviously has reliability issues for us that concern us greatly. And so I'm looking forward through the roundtables and also through the presentations to learn from you as well. So those of you that are not local, welcome to Chicago, a very relieved and happy city after last night's Chicago Blackhawks game. So if anybody's from Michigan, I apologize. But always at something like this, part of it is to give a welcome to folks. And I used to be a mayor, and we used to give welcomes all the time to people coming in for different conferences and things. And the person who was my predecessor as mayor gave a welcome one morning to a group at a hotel in Rockford, Illinois, which is a town about 90 miles northwest of here, which is also where I ended up being mayor of. And he gave this group, and he said what mayors always say, or what people giving welcomes always say at conferences. They say, if there's anything that you need while you're in town or while you're in the state, please don't hesitate to call us. And he was in his office later that day, and he gets a call, and the guy says, Mayor Box, and he says, yeah. And he said, you gave a welcome this morning at the hotel? He said, yeah. He said, remember when you told us if we needed anything while we were here to let you know? And he said, yeah. The guy said, well, I'm in jail. So we never said that anymore when we welcome people. And I know that's not an issue for anybody in this group today, but I apologize for not being here yesterday. We had an oral argument in front of the commission on a gas rate case. Very interesting stuff. I know you're in the very capable hands of Kevin Gunn, who used to be one of my colleagues as the chair of the Missouri Commission, a really good public servant and somebody that we're going to miss. Missouri's loss is a private sector's gain, but Kevin did a great job, and hopefully he'll be here a little bit this morning as well. I had a unique experience, but before the last 2 years where I've spent chairing the Commerce Commission, I spent 5.5 years as a director of Illinois' EPA. And in that time, obviously, dealt with all of the issues that you're talking about today, and some of the earlier iterations of some of the issues that you're talking about today. So while I was at EPA, I chaired our climate advisory group, where we made recommendations as to the things that we could do as a state to try to reduce greenhouse gases. Worked on CARE and CAMR, which we all remember from the old days of previous federal legislation that was out there. And I'm going to talk about that more in just a second. But also been the head of the Climate Registry for the last several years, which is a group, a national and international group that works with companies trying to help them report and learn more about their greenhouse gas emissions. We put together a regional cap and trade program, much for those of you familiar with RGGI in the northeastern states, trying to reduce greenhouse gases there with what California is doing with their carbon market right now. We had a similar construct that we had built up here in the Midwest. Then a bunch of governors changed, and suddenly we looked around the room, and there was like 3 of us that were left in the room, and so that plan never got put into effect. But we had spent a lot of time up front with all of the stakeholders who are involved, including the regulated industries, actually working through, in some cases on an industry-by-industry basis, how all of these different regulations would affect them, and really trying to come up with a Midwestern response to that, that I think served us very well in terms of educating everybody who was involved in that process. And that work actually carries on today. There's still a group in the Midwest that's working together, and I'm still part of that, even though I've switched away from the environmental and into the utility regulatory area. There's still a group in the Midwest that's made up of power generators, of government regulatory agencies, of some of the non-governmental organizations who are very interested in these issues, that's actually just working on what a Midwestern response would be if US EPA comes through with what are called the 111D regs, which are carbon regulations for existing sources. So again, very important work, we think, because what we're trying to do is figure out from a Midwestern perspective not only what those regulations would do to us and how they would impact us in the Midwest, but also a response that we could have in trying to work going forward with US EPA if and when they start to come forward with those regulations, which I think is going to be when, not just if, because I think they're actually going to do that. And then worked with a lot of different organizations with RGGI, with the Western Climate Initiative, California, some of the provinces in Canada, actually working on trying to get all of these different groups who are working on carbon reduction plans to actually try to get them to all work together and find out that in the absence of any kind of federal legislation, was there a way to try to knit those things together so that one region or another didn't have a built-in advantage or a disadvantage in terms of responding to these regs. So we bring this to the ICC, and one of the things that you're going to find, if you haven't already, when you start to look at this, is that the people who regulate utilities and the people who regulate environmental issues don't always talk to each other a whole lot. That's true, and that's true nationally, that's true here in Illinois, that's true in other states. It's a very siloed process. And so one of the things that I found when I became a utility commissioner was that the kinds of issues that you're talking about today, and the nuts and bolts of how these regs work and what the actual impact is and what kind of, when people are talking about these reductions that you're getting, whether it's from mercury or from SOx or NOx or whatever you're trying to reduce. There's not, at the job that I do now, and my colleagues across the country, there aren't a lot of people who have had any experience in that. And so there's a large educational piece that has to go on with that as well. And so I've been very involved in our national association here and in part of that effort to try to help bridge that gap if we can. I mentioned before, and I think it's important for what we're talking about today, that when I was at IEPA, we actually worked in Illinois with all of our companies, actually on a unit-by-unit basis. When CARE and CAMR were out there before MATS and CASPER, we can get all our acronyms out at one time, but when the federal regulations governing NOx and SOx and then mercury were out there before, in Illinois, the public policy perspective was that they didn't go far enough fast enough. And so we actually, especially with mercury, so we actually went to our companies and said, we want more reductions and we want them more quickly, which was met, as you can imagine, with we can't do it that fast, we don't think that'll work. So we actually sat down and worked on a multi-pollutant strategy with all of our different companies to actually find out what they could do, what they could actually make work in terms of adding equipment and doing some things, changing coal types, doing other things that would actually make those reductions, not just to mercury, but also to sulfur dioxide and nitrogen oxide, and actually have had very good success in trying to bring those down. Now, the economy changed dramatically since we did that as well, and so the rise of natural gas put an extra crimp into that, and so these companies have had to adapt, but they are still working through putting all of that on, and all of the mercury equipment actually got on time and actually are hitting the reductions that we thought that they could hit and that the companies have proved. And one of the good things about that is the companies have proven, and why I think the kinds of things you're talking about and the expertise you guys bring to this is when we were talking about doing those regs, we ended up, what the solutions ended up being in many cases were things that neither the companies nor us were actually envisioning at the time. Put the engineers to work, figured out what the numbers were, and they figured out ways to hit that maybe in ways that we hadn't even anticipated, and I think that that's a good lesson for us going forward. So as we start talking about what's going to happen with US EPA and the confirmation of the administrator and the other regs that are going to come out, I think it's really important for us to keep working with all the different folks who have a piece of that, including the regulatory commissioners. And so that's why your conference today is something that I'm really looking forward to, both to refresh myself on some of the things I left behind a couple of years ago, and also to figure out from a regulator's perspective in a competitive state as we are here for power generation, how this is going to affect us going forward. So thanks very much for allowing me to speak for a couple minutes. Welcome again to Chicago. If you're in jail, can't help you, sorry. But just about anything else, let us know. Thanks very much.
Okay, first presenter of the day is Dr. Yuval Davidor, CEO of Lextran.
Good morning, everyone. I will confess that it's out of the few thousand of presentations that I've made in my career, this is a bit more challenging because after hearing the conversations yesterday, I have rewritten my presentation, and I have 3 openings, debating still with which to use. The original was affordable SNOx emission control, thinking that we all know that it's not rocket science to treat mercury, it's not rocket science to treat NOxes, SOxes, everything. You know, it's only a matter of making it operationally sensible, economically viable. We all know, or sorry if I misrepresent interests around the tables here, that whenever a legislation comes about, there's a pushback from whomever needs to do something, especially if it costs money. we can't do it, timeline, cost, jobs, etc. It's always the same in all industries throughout the history, okay? And since we all know that the technology is there, it's really just a matter of deciding what level of effort that we are willing to try and extract or kind of like make the effort and to say, okay, what level of innovation or go out of my way to make something happen, okay? So, I need my glasses. So we all know, we all heard about that it's becoming very difficult to avoid the rain, no more quotas, all plants, all stacks, all boilers need to adhere. There's maybe an extra year, extra 2 years, but it's getting there. And much of the discussions yesterday were around that. We also heard that there is, as a result of fuel flexibility offering, much of the coal, smaller, older, less efficient, are scheduled to be fading out. Now, if something is scheduled to be faded out because it is no longer of objective net use, then obviously there is nothing to do, scrap it, build something else. The thing is that I feel that all this discussion has been exacerbated as a result of the more strict requirements for emission control. It adds few dollars for the megawatt hour that all of us produce, and as a result of that, it tips the balance. So really the challenge, if we are speaking about wanting to keep energy, because definitely in several parts of the world and in the United States, there is a rise in use, and everybody else yesterday forecasted that it's going to remain or increase. It's really just how to make it less costly or less complex to deploy. So conventional EPC are using a huge structure to do de-SOx and another huge structure to do de-NOx. Without going into the details, the science, the engineering, it's obvious that having two large structures with ID fans, filters, concrete, and so on increases the real estate, increases the maintenance cost, increases everything. The reason that we have single pollutant treatment methodologies is because this is how the industry evolved. No one back 40 years ago, 50 years ago had the crystal ball and say, well, you're going to need to treat selenium as well. Well, in whatever few years, it's around the corner. So we have developed, or we came to scientists and asked what's good for SOx and say, well, very clear. What Lextran did was benefiting from the fact that we came very, very late to the game. Okay, we already knew that SOx needs to be treated and NOx needs to be treated. We also knew that mercury will be required to be treated. And we said, okay, can you make a more efficient process? And when you're looking into optimization, it was a design requirement that we set ourselves to achieve. Avoid using solids. Try to stick to liquid to gas processes. They are much more scalable, much more linear in terms of cost, much more friendly to the operators. So this is the story I'm going to present. No new engineering, just doing it in one single pass. So the idea was to develop a catalyst that will have active sites that are designed to react with SOx, NOx, etc., anything that you want to remove, and to hold it strong enough in that position. To those that have some chemistry background, we know it's easy to oxidize NO to NO2 and to NO3. The problem is that it is reversing almost equally well. Okay, so just oxidizing and letting the water or whatever, something to dissolve these states is not good enough. We have re-emissions and we have very low efficiencies, okay? So we're using an organic liquid which is amenable to be planted with active sites. Each one is particular for the pollutant that you want to remove. The characteristics, mechanical, physical characteristics of the R and R prime groups are to make the characteristics of viscosity, boiling points, etc., optimal. This is just, some of the catalyst. Now, what I want to stress is that really there is very, very little change that's being introduced. We are still using the well-known, used wet scrubber environment up to the point that we can use existing wet scrubbers that are used for lime FGD's process. We only replace the emulsion. Is there a laser beam? No. Well, I'll use this, okay? So flue gases come in, they go through a PM filter, go into the scrubber, and there are many types of scrubbers. Some have dual towers, so it goes up and it goes down. Some sprayed from above, some sprayed from below. That is beside the point. Any good engineering design for absorption tower will do. You replace the emulsion, instead of being an open circuit, to a closed circuit. So you have the Lextran emulsion being circulated and circulated. And in that process, when it comes in contact with the flue gases and the ambient conditions, there's some oxygen there is some water. We oxidize the SO2, NO, NO2 to their highest states, SO4 minus 2, NO3 minus 1. And hold them there and don't let them reverse. So then it becomes very simple to add an alkali material to make a salt. It leaves the process and the catalyst goes back to the process. Okay? The choice of alkali obviously will determine the type of byproduct. You can select a useless alkali that will produce a disposed or a solid or a salt that needs landfilling. You can use, or you can select a skillful one, and which will result in a fertilizer, whether it's potassium-based or ammonia-based, and there are several kinds like that. I will not go into the engineering. It's very simple. Phase separator, separating the aqueous phase from the organic phase by shear gravity, and filtering the few little solids that have stuck to the catalyst or to the environment out of the PM that did filter in or did pass through the filters. Okay. So, making it in one structure, the fact that we have a usable product, the fact that we are able to maintain very high removal efficiencies, 99%, 90% for NOx. It allows fuel flexibility. You can use any coal mix. It operates on any type of flue gas. It doesn't care what the fuel you have. We have been used on in various chemical factories as well, treating zinc factory emissions with over 22,000 ppm of SO2. Very little emission control. This is just the intro. This is not really the presentation because, as I told you, I was a bit discouraged after hearing yesterday's conversations. This is an economical review, extensive economical review that EPRI did during 2012 on our technology. And you can see that it has obviously analyzed it for PRB, bituminous, lignite. You can have here the comparison of the CapEx or investment. Whoops, that wasn't supposed to come yet. And you can see that on the CapEx side, there is, on the CapEx side, there is a considerable saving envisaged. We don't have an operating plant in the United States, but we have in Europe and in China. And this indeed is the reason why, people that need to build select it. But again, this is not what I'm trying to pitch here, because we've learned that everybody says we have too little time to look into building new stuff, and we just need to hurry up with what we have. I only would like to point out that it's on the right side, on the right columns, you have the levelized CapEx and OpEx combined, and it's not just the CapEx savings because you're doing two in one, it's an operational savings as well. Okay, in meals for kilowatt hour. The sensitivity or the analysis of the report was quite extensive. I'm just showing one additional slide, the sensitivity regarding the reagent cost that is being used in the process. And you can see that even if you vary the reagent cost by 50% up or down, it doesn't change the economics that much, and it maintains a stable cost saving compared with conventional technologies like FGD and SCRs. More detailed cost comparison, some pilot results, efficiency results, different oils. This is the point where I'll start to slow down, because if there is something to be gained here, is for the less conventional thinking. And this was picked up by the North Dakota Lignite Council. Lignite in North Dakota, and I think in neighboring states as well, have a problem having sodium, which prevents the use of SCRs, and they actually got an exemption or a significant delay, and it's really still in debate with the EPA, because the EPA recognized that they don't have an adequate technology to treat or to remove or meet the NOx emissions requirements with the existing technologies. Okay, so being sponsored by NDRC, then obviously ERC was put into play. You can see here whatever inlet level, the very thin red line at the bottom is the outlet level. This is just on a stable run. It was much more chaotic on a variety of conditions that were tested. This is just to give you a good feeling that it's really nothing to be invented. We know the chemistry. We know it's not difficult. Really, there is no news here. It's just making two in one, replacing the emulsion, makes it a much more lean. Okay. I told you that we have some commercial implementations. This one is in Romania, 25 megawatt E. This is the Minister of Environmental Protection in the Romanian government at the time. They change governments about every 1.5 years there. This is 20 megawatt E built in the International Airport of Beijing, running on coal, treating the steam that is used to heat the airport campus. And the last one, which is the largest but the least exciting picture, just because it has just the top part, this is over 1 million cubic meters an hour sintering machine scrubber, which is the equivalent about of 300 megawatt of a power plant emission using our process. In all cases, the scrubber and all the peripherals were built by local engineering companies. As I said, nothing to be invented. And we don't own the engineering technology. We just sell an emulsion that makes the magic. So, coming back to yesterday's presentations, we heard about a significant fleet that for a variety of reasons combined are going to be shut down or phased out. And that fleet is the fleet that is of the smaller boiler sizes. Indeed, it also includes several hundreds of industrial boilers, less of the interest of this forum. Nonetheless, if we are speaking about environment and we are burning coal, it should. Okay, so I want to speak about the smaller boiler sizes, 300 and below, and to show you in a continuation work that we did with URS, trying to extrapolate the marginal cost per 1 megawatt as you go down from the 500 megawatt, which was the base case that APRI computed their graphs, towards a smaller scale. So you have here the cost per megawatt combined of de-SOx, de-NOx with conventional, which are the solid lines for two different type of coals. If I put my glasses, I think it's bituminous and PRB. Yeah. Red line is the bituminous and the turquoise is PRB. And the dotted lines are the cost per the levelized CAPEX, OPEX over 10 years amortization of Lextran based process, which combined with the previous slide suggests that it's no wonder that for smaller boiler sizes from 300 megawatts down, we are much slower, much more twitching and eking. How are we going to deal? And many of the decisions are going to be, we find many excuses and we're going to shut them down. Okay? Well, because if you go down, and any of you that have boilers like that or neighbors that have boilers like that have run the economics and came up to horrendous high figures for the small units. Because per megawatt, if you're using conventional technologies, it's very, very expensive. You can see that it over doubles compared to 500 megawatt base case comparison. Yeah, well, there's enough to do here. So I'm going to conclude by coming back to the table that I just presented and skimmed through. And I'm going to focus on the operating costs. Let's put aside the capital expense, because I think many of us, at least from conversations that I had yesterday, said, you know, let's assume that it takes X million of dollars, it was over 100. Even if you're using your process or the type of process you're suggesting will bring down it to 50 million, still doesn't worth us investing the money in a unit that is going to operate for 12, 15 years from now. And most of the arguments that I heard were capital expense arguments. So let's put aside capital expense. Let's see that we need to treat it. Let's speak about OPEX. What we see here is if we look, actually I should have had it on one column left on the levelized. Here it is, I did. So let's switch the conversation from the overall cost to the operating expense, okay? And if I can convert that into dollars per megawatt hour of operating costs savings, that might change the perspective. My hope is that all those sunk cost boilers of 300 megawatt and down, which can still serve for 10, 12, 15, don't know how long, may get a second chance not to be shut down and for people to go a little bit out of the way and to say, okay, we can do with a different type of economics. And the last point that I want to make is, just because I didn't make it well enough two slides before, is that at the beginning of the presentation I said we're using wet scrubber technology, wet scrubber environment. Okay, we can use an existing wet scrubber. We just change, replace the emulsion we spray. Most wet scrubbers will be the same or the adequate materials to run this. Okay. So the cost to do a retrofit, and retrofit here is to take an existing and just modify it for a new operation. You have the sunk cost. That will be a small fraction of the anticipated greenfield CapEx investment requirement. By doing that, you maintain the high SOx removal or even increase it. But at the same time, you do two things. You upgrade your facility to treat NOx to the required emission levels and more, and you reduce your operating expenses. It may not be a solution relevant for many boilers out there, and there are many technologies and other people that will need to scratch their heads and figure out what to do. It's a tough call. But there is a large enough number of boilers, units, that as a result of retrofitting an existing wet scrubber, and if they are still adequate for another 10, 12, 15, 17 years of operation, I argue that there is a technology, or there is, and by the way, it's not the only technology which is a bit more sophisticated than line FGD and SCR, okay? So with that, I thank you. My interests and my hopes for coming to this meeting were twofold. One was to learn where is US? I mean, what are the driving force, the trends, the considerations? I've learned a lot, and that I've ticked as done, and surely the rest of the day will still be fruitful. The other goal was to try and trigger an interest with some of you who have, or some of you who know somebody that has, smaller boilers, 300 and down, that kind of like on the margin call, give me a call. Thank you very much, and if you have questions. Yes.
In regard to the retrofit, I know you don't have a lot of time, is that primarily in regard to the conveyance system of the emulsion, or what is the primary requirement for the retrofit of the wet scrubber?
It's getting rid of all the metal, grinders and gypsum processing and all that stuff that you would not need anymore. It will mean installing 2 additional tanks, not too large, having an alkali storage and the fertilizer byproduct buffer before it's solidified, dried, and taken out. Maybe replacing the spray nozzles, because lime typically has very large nozzles and we have smaller nozzles. But most of the equipment can be used. In rare cases, we would need to replace the lining inside the tower. Again, depends on the material that the tower was made out of. And there will be cases that the actual specific case cost would say no, doesn't worth it while.
And last question, have you run any short-term field tests here in the United States at this point?
Short what?
Field tests.
No. Well, the only thing is what we did last year with NDRC, with the support of the Department of Energy. Sorry, I didn't mention it before. And we are looking now, we are going to participate in a few months exercise, actually focusing on CO2 capture, where higher levels of SOx removal are beneficial. And so we are going to be the upstream treatment facility for that. And we are very eagerly looking for any small test facility that we can use to demonstrate the performance.
Any more questions?
Thank you.
Okay, if you would like to make your way to your first roundtable choice, and then your host will begin the first set of discussions.